Well, let's get to the other big story of the day and this weekend, and that would be the massive winter storm. Americans across the country are preparing for what could be an historic weather event with freezing temperatures, ice, and heavy snow. Our next guest says the impact on businesses could last well past the weekend. Let's bring in Paul Walsh, publisher at G2 Weather Intelligence. Paul, great to have you with us. And what I learned from a meteorologist in the last hour is that it's not snow. It is ice, and that it actually weighs 8 pounds a gallon, which I didn't know.
Yeah, and I just learned something, too, and I've been in this business for like 20 years, is that when you get ice accumulation more than an inch, which is what we're expecting for some areas, in some areas maybe even an inch and a half, it's described as a winter hurricane. And so when you put that context on it and you look at the fact that this is going to be overspreading a large part of the southern part of the country, including Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, Tennessee, and North Carolina, and then across the area in the Northeast, where I happen to be right now and where you guys are, we're going to be looking at anywhere from a foot to 2 feet of snow. It's going to close down basically consumer activity for the weekend, unfortunately, which is going to take a huge bite out of retail. And then behind that, we have this massive cold snap coming in. So everything's going to freeze. And so we're going to basically have a week that is, for a large part of the country, turned down or turned off, essentially.
Right. Restaurants, you say, are going to be really impacted. Retail, I was curious about, because you're not going to stores, but maybe people really aren't going to stores that much these days anyway, and they're buying a lot online. And if you're shut in, maybe you're buying more online.
Well, what happens is on the retail, you have to look at the different channels. So home centers, Home Depot, Lowe's, Tractor Supply are all going to benefit from the sort of this pre-storm surge. The problem for them, and especially, is that when we have the shutdown, they'll be shut down as well. They'll make some of it up, but it kind of balances out when they recover. Home Depot is a little bit more exposed because their pro business could be impacted. If we have businesses that are not able to do construction work for several days or even a week after the storm, I mean, this is a massive storm. Don't underestimate the potential impact. On the grocery side, similar. We're seeing, just from an anecdotal sort of take, grocers here in the western suburbs of Philadelphia are already running out of inventory. I was at BJ's yesterday. Even then, there were long lines and people scurrying around trying to stock the shelves. Today, I'm seeing anecdotes of shelves actually empty. And so it's going to take really good execution on by these retailers to be able to sort of keep up with that. And then again, they'll be shut down over the weekend and even into next week if the storm is as bad as we think. So it basically is going to take a chunk out of retail sales for Q4, and I think that could have some impact in terms of potential surprises on the downside when earnings are released next week or next month, I should say.
Hey, Paul, Tim, thanks for joining us. Interesting, channel checks you're giving us from your part of the world. And I guess my pushback on all this, it's kind of like when we talk about earnings in the context of, FX neutral or in constant currency terms. I care less about the currency dynamic than I care about the core business. We weren't applauding the retail and the restaurant sectors when we had 3 of the most mild winters on record over the last 3 years, and it wasn't seen as a tailwind. Is that crazy? In other words, to say, hey, why wasn't this a benefit when there were no weather disruptions? Why suddenly can't we look past? This is both an analyst decision and an investor's decision, but also in the context of what has been one of the worst winters we've had in a long time. Why can't we just look past this?
Well, when you're talking about mild winters or mild falls and even in mild winters, typically that is not a tailwind. Typically that's a headwind, especially for department stores, specialty apparel, where they've got a large assortment of seasonal product categories. And that's where you'll hear on earnings calls where companies will be talking about the fact that because it was a warmer than normal winter, they lost business because of that. And you're right, we had a relatively mild fall. Actually, this fall, it turned pretty cold, and so we had a good tailwind going into Q3 earnings, if I get yes. So you saw companies like Gap and Ross Stores surprising on the upside. The problem here is that I think some of the Q4 business may have been pulled into Q3 because they had the tailwind of the colder late October, which was comping a very warm October the prior year. And then in terms of this quarter, we've had very, very cold weather here in the Northeast, but really the balance of the country has been relatively mild. And additionally, in California, of course, we had the so-called atmospheric river. So it's going to be very complicated, but I do think that there's going to be some surprises on the downside in retail. And I think this event is going to contribute to that.